Sometimes people say pretty mean things to you when you go out and you play gigs. And it just kind of comes with the territory. People are going out to have a good time. It's hard to not take it personally, especially when you're young and especially when they're super mean. But I like to kind of collect some of these stories, and I'll share them sometimes. I don't want to share them all at once because it'll sound like people are always saying mean things to me or that I must be really terrible. But there was one time that I think is worth sharing because it was such a good line. Some of these things I collect, and some of them I even have notes from the tip jar that I could share on future episodes. But this one was, there was a place that was on Route 1, and it's now out of business, and I love that. I love that it's out of business. The place was called the Fat Cactus, and now it's a parking lot spillover for it's a Nissan dealership. So all the extra Nissans are parked out there now, and the restaurant's out of business, which is great because I was not treated extremely well there. But I was young, and I made mistakes, not going to lie. But on one night where I rolled through with my acoustic guitar, this old Martin before it had all the holes in it, I must have been like 18 years old. And I went to play a gig at the Fat Cactus. And I knew that it only took me about 5 minutes to set up. But people get scared when you only have about 5 minutes to set up, or it's only 15 minutes until you start. They start to wonder, where is this kid? So I roll through like 15 minutes before start time. I knew I only needed 5 minutes to set up. And as I'm walking in, this guy goes, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm the musician." And he said, "You're late." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm about to start on time. I don't start till 8 o'clock, whatever it was. It was 7:50. And I knew, this is going to be a rough night. And sometimes it's a rough night. So the staff ended up being really nice, and they liked me and treated me okay. But apparently that guy did not like me, and he did not like the fact that I had only given myself 15 minutes to show up and to plug in. I still started on time for what it's worth. But one of my favorite mean comments from a gig came from that night when I went to take a break. And I said, there was like 4 or 5 people there. It was a Mexican restaurant. This was, I don't know. I don't even know if it was the summertime. So I go, so you got to remember, I hardly know any songs. I'm just playing like some Jimi Hendrix, some blues. I never said I'm going to learn all of the songs you need to learn to succeed at this gig. I never learned Margaritaville or anything. So I got up there. I've got my Steve Ray Vaughan. I've got my Hendrix. I've got my Allman Brothers. I've got whatever I've got, some band, some Bob Dylan, a lot of the stuff that I do now, some Eric Clapton. So I go to take a break and I say, "All right, thanks for listening. I'm going to take 5. And I heard a woman say, I don't think she meant to say it loud enough to actually hear, for me to hear, but she said, "Take the whole night." And I was like, that's got to be one of the meanest things anyone's ever told somebody. Take the whole night, man. Why take 5? Take the rest of the night. Let's put on the radio and you go home, Jake. We are tired of hearing you play. So, on Earth Tones, episode 26, there's going to be some rough nights. That's what we're talking about. But first, Earth Sound 26. That is the rain falling down in Florida. That was at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I woke up and I was like, wow, that's such a beautiful sound, especially when there's no other sounds. It's just pure rain. And I went out and recorded that late night in Naples, Florida. That is the rain coming down hard on a late night. All right, for a bit of old news. This is Guitar Player Magazine with Joe Bonamassa on the cover from, looks like it's December. It says Holiday 2014. So 13 years ago, Joe Bonamassa looks younger. He does. Sorry, Joe. You have aged. He looks great in this. He still looks great. He's got his sunglasses on, but this is 2014. And he was 37 at the time, it says in this article. And I'm going to share something from this Joe Bonamassa feature. He was 37. This was 13 years ago. And man, they show a picture of him with every amp and every guitar. He talks about how extensive his collection was already. So he's 37 years old, and he's already got a huge bulk of his collection, the dumbbells, all sorts of this stuff. But I got a kick out of this. This is him talking to, I believe it's the interviewer of the magazine, but it's a little snippet. The author is Jude Gold, and Jude writes, "A better example of Bonamassa's guitar store stealth," because they were talking about him not being recognized and how that's kind of one of his signatures, is that Joe Bonamassa can walk into any music shop and not be recognized. "A better example of Bonamassa's guitar store stealth occurred in a Reno guitar shop a few years back. Tempted by a pristine 1987 Marshall Silver Jubilee head, where he says, I quote, "I can't have too many of those," Bonamassa asked for the price. "The guy at the counter said, 'It's $4,000, says Bonamassa. I asked him why the price was so high, and he said, 'Well, Slash used Jubilees for the Guns N' Roses tone, and now this kid Joe Bonamassa is using them, so it's $4,000. Little did he know he was talking to Joe Bonamassa. Joe Bonamassa tries to buy an amp that he thought he could get cheap, only to find out that him using it himself is why it's become expensive. That's pretty funny. Joe Bonamassa goes amp shopping. Man, he must be racking up some serious cash with all those instruments. He was talking about having 59 bursts, multiple dumbbells and everything. Millions of dollars of music equipment. Unbelievable. All right, the main discussion. There's going to be some rough nights. Okay, here it is. There's going to be rough nights. You can't play at the top of your game every night, especially if what you're trying to do is play at the limit of what you're capable of doing. If you're taking risks, well, it's risky. You may fall on your face, literally. I remember at least one time I tripped and fell on my face on stage. What's most important is to accept that you've got to make a habit of showing up and being honest. If you're honest with yourself and your audience, what else can you ask for? Let's put on a good show, and if we can't, it's not because we didn't try. You've got to be the one in the arena. I can't say it any better than Teddy Roosevelt, so I'll share his quote. This is his quote about the man in the arena. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." That is one of the coolest things ever said by anybody ever. And that is Teddy Roosevelt saying all credit is due to the man or woman or person in the arena, the person who's actually putting themselves out there. And that's one of the challenges with our internet world. And last week, of course, I was joking about how the internet is not cool. One of the reasons why the internet is not cool is that everybody is critical. We have so many extremely critical views on display on the internet. And it makes it seem like the world is a very dark and mean place, but it's really not. The thing is that woman who said that mean joke about / to me that night, I immediately was able to kind of like laugh about that. I think I probably did laugh in the moment. Of course, I felt a little sad that they didn't like me, but it was a funny thing to say. And I could hear that it was a funny thing to say. They didn't like me, and that's fine. And I looked over, I saw who she was, I took it all in stride, I took it in the context. It's not like I looked over and I realized, oh, Stevie Wonder is the one who's making fun of me. I just saw it was a local woman who was out to have some tacos and have a good time, and she's just joking around. So you take it in the context because you can see the social cues of where you're at. On the internet, all the comments are written from somebody that seems, for some reason, to have some sort of credibility, or at least equal amount of credibility as every other commenter. And it's just not true. I don't know anybody at all who comments on YouTube videos. I know so many people, and none of them have ever said, I was commenting on this YouTube video and I got into an exchange with somebody. If I know people who comment on videos, they've never told me once that they've ever commented. And I've probably written 2 or 3 comments in my whole life on YouTube, and it's only ever been on small creators' channels to just say, hey, that was really cool, keep going. I don't get into online discussions, but I see them and we read the comments, and we know so many people do. But I think it's really hard to keep them in context. If you're playing out in the world, people are making fun of you. That's kind of just the reality. And maybe they make fun of me more than they make fun of you. But that's just part of the reality, that people are joking around. They're out there to have a good time. But in the context of the real world, you can see and put it into the context that these are just folks, joking around. And you don't take them that seriously because you see that this guy is kind of drunk and he's just running his mouth and he thinks that he's funny and he thinks he's smart. And you just sort of see him as a big doofus and you laugh it off. And you're just like, oh man, that guy said some mean stuff about how I play guitar. It's not a big deal. But when someone on the internet says it on a comment and says, your tone is terrible and you can't play, you take it personally. And there's different strategies of dealing with that. I don't have many commenters or viewers, so it's not like I have to deal with this that much, but I've had to deal with some of it. And you get, comments that are surprisingly negative, and you think, man, why did you ever do that? And if you could see the person in the real world, then you would just look him in the eye and be like, what's your problem? And you'd probably end up being friends with that guy. And sometimes I do that. If I've got some negative thing and I just respond with some positivity, or at least just keep a little conversation going, sometimes you can end up chatting with somebody and they might have said something really mean, but then you end up, just chatting. So if you can find some peaceful resolution, that's the best case scenario. But the key is, if we can not take it personally, if we can have a laugh about it and see that what we're trying to do is to just play and accept that, yeah, man, sometimes I have a bad night, then it is what it is. Now, Pat Metheny said something really interesting. He was interviewed years back. I tried to find the clip, but it's been turned into like a private video on YouTube, so I can't see it. Ironically enough, it's a YouTube video that I want to see, and he was talking about YouTube and how YouTube is kind of a problem for musicians like himself. He was saying that back in the day, you could go to jam sessions, you could go sit in with somebody, and you could take risks, and they could go poorly, and it wasn't a big deal because it was just going and playing with someone. And he was reminiscing and saying, like, I used to be able to just kind of walk in a room and everyone says, oh, cool, Pat came by, and to just play some stuff. And now people pull out their phone and say, wow, Pat Metheny is on stage with XYZ. And they film it and it goes on YouTube. And YouTube ends up making it look like it's as official of a release as any of your records. And so he was lamenting the fact that he couldn't be as spontaneous because it was kind of inhibiting knowing that he was always being filmed. Back in the day, bootlegs have been a thing forever, but they were traded amongst people who were fans, and it had to be worth copying. You weren't going to copy something and say, look at how Pat Metheny didn't play well on this song. There's no point of wasting a cassette on that. If you had that, you might say that's an anomaly, that's an interesting thing, that's part of my collection. I have Pat Metheny playing badly on this one cassette, but it's not going to be widely distributed. On YouTube, it becomes, check out Pat Metheny play terrible on this song. So I can see why he would feel like things had really changed because of the YouTube era with everything being filmed. It might be one of the reasons why the internet is not cool. Of course, the opposite argument could be made, that being able to humanize our heroes and see them in those contexts, see that they have off nights, see that they're just folks like us, maybe that is inspiring to you. Maybe we all, should take these things a little less personally and be okay with all of our spontaneous failures being on the internet. But I don't know, man. I'm not sure if a video of me falling on my face would make me happy if that was on YouTube. But I don't know. That's just our modern era. So for a musical demonstration for this week. That is a couple bars out of the song Freedom by Jimi Hendrix. Freedom is one of the posthumous songs, but it's one of the most complete ones. So there's a great collection that was put together in the 90s that's called The First Rays of the New Rising Sun. I think Freedom is also on the Experience Hendrix CD, which was a compilation that I had when I was a kid. And so I think I might have heard it there in the first place. And that was kind of weird because I had that CD and I knew that like front to back. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that some of those songs were not from his original studio records. They were posthumous songs like Freedom. I think Angel too. Some of those songs, they're killer and they're not on the official Big Three studio records. But to me, they're just as classic because they're totally finished Jimi Hendrix songs, unlike some of the songs that have been put together that are kind of like rough drafts that they've figured out how to complete. So for that musical demonstration, that happens in the middle of the song, and I think it's Noel Redding. I guess it could have been Billy Cox by that point. So it could have been Billy Cox, but the bass player plays the line before Hendrix does, and it's really cool. It happens like 8 bars. It almost foreshadows the line, and then Hendrix comes in on that line. And I've always just thought it was so funky and cool. So the idea for me this week was, I've been talking the last few weeks about obsessing about Jimi Hendrix and just being willing to go after the things I'm excited about. And that, I just think is such a cool groove that I wanted to just grab it instead of just playing it for those 8 bars that happens in the song. I just set a metronome and I played that over and over again. I thought about my picking, thought about relaxing. There's something about playing something over and over again where your hands, they get kind of warm and they become electric, they become magical, and you feel the instrument different and you hear the dynamics of the instrument. So I'd encourage you, if there's something that you just like, that you think is a little riff or a melody, play it just endlessly. See if you can drive your cat crazy, your grandma crazy. Just play it a million times and you'll find your hands kind of get into it and it gets into your spirit and you hear it inside out. All right, what's on the turntable? Jeff Beck, Wired. I try to not cover the same album multiple times so far on the Earth Tones episodes. And when I stuck my hand in the vinyl record shelf there, the cabinet, I first pulled out Pretzel Logic by Steely Dan, and I thought, oh, well, I've done that one before. And then the next record I pulled out was Wired by Jeff Beck, and I know I've done this before, but I thought, well, that's a great record. That's what I want to listen to, and I did. It's amazing. We've talked about it before. In 1976, on the front, he's playing the Strat. On the back, he's playing the Les Paul. He did not write any of the songs on this record, for what it's worth. There are a bunch of I believe his name's pronounced Narada Michael Walden. So there's a song of his, there's Max Middleton, there's multiple, there's one Jan Hammer, and then of course that amazing Charles Mingus Goodbye Pork Pie Hat version. So legendary record, Jeff Beck, Wired. Something that helped me this week, focusing on what's exciting. Like I said, I'm in just full Hendrix absorption mode. I set up my old Strat with the maple fretboard. I've got it tuned down a half step. I'm using that John Mayer Neural DSP plugin, and I'm just playing as much Hendrix as I possibly can with the little time that I can find in the day, but trying to do it every day. That is episode 26. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. 26 episodes of Earth Tones now. Visit jakepardee.com for more information about me and my music, maritimerecording.com for more information about you or your music or your audiobook. Recording an audiobook this month and having a lot of fun with it. So thank you as always for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope your new year has started off well. And I'm Jake Pardee, reminding you as always that we are a fantastically musical species on a distinctly musical planet. And I will see you next week for episode 27. Maybe we should do a 27 Clubs feature for that. We'll see. See you next week for Earth Tones, episode 27.